Hey everybody, this is Andrew with mobileburn.com and dailyiPhoneblog.com, and I'm here with an Apple iPad Air. Now we all know this is the lightest iPad to date, but is it also the best? We're going to find that out now. When you first look at the iPad Air, the name is pretty much self-evident because this thing is very light. When I say very, I mean very light. They got it down to just 1 single pound. Now, on the surface, you say, all right, big deal, it's a pound. But if you've ever touched an iPad 2 or a third generation iPad, you can definitely feel there's a big difference in weight. And one of the things that allows you to do is something you think would be pretty common by now when it comes to tablets, and that's hold it in one hand comfortably. This is a large tablet, but I can hold it with one hand for an extended period of time when I'm reading and not feel bad at all. I sat like this for about an hour on the train, and the entire way I didn't feel like this was heavy. I would never have tried that with an iPad 2, which is the last iPad that I use on a consistent basis. So them managing to get it much lighter is pretty impressive. But that's not the only thing they've done in terms of design. And speaking of metal, on the back they have a metal material, but it feels very smooth and it feels very light, which again taps back into them managing to get the size of the iPad Air down to a very manageable portion. Along this, as far as buttons go, on the right you have your volume up and down. Of course, you have your mute switch. At the top, you have the power button. And of course, you can also turn the power on by tapping the home button. This is one area that might disappoint a few people because there's no Touch ID like you have on the iPhone 5, which is a really good feature, something that I like about the iPhone 5. It's actually, 5S I should say. It's actually one of my favorite features, but it's not present here. It doesn't bother me as much because I typically use tablets in the home, so I don't really need a lock screen on them. But if you're somebody who wants that, that's going to be disappointing for you. Once you get over the shock of the iPad Air being this light, one of the very first things you'll notice is the screen. It's a large 9.7-inch display, and it's a Retina display, which has decent quality. Well, actually, I should say more than decent. It has a 2048 by 1536 resolution. So that's about 264 pixels per inch. Now, obviously, there are some higher pixel per inch ratios. Even on the 5S, you've got a higher ratio. And in the tablet sphere, you've got the Nexus 7 and the Nexus 10, which are really pushing the boundaries. But at the same time, you're still going to get a quality display for when you're watching videos or reading comic books or reading text or anything like that. Aside from that, when it comes to speed, it's got the A7 processor. That's a very fast processor. It's the same as you see in the 5S. And similarly, you have about the same amount of performance. It's also a 64-bit architecture. It doesn't mean much at the moment, but in the future, that might mean a lot more once Apple really gets into it and the third-party developers do as well. It also has the M7 motion processor, but since this is a tablet, having all that fitness apps and the sensors isn't going to provide as much of a ready impact, but I'm sure somebody's going to figure out a way to do something with that. In terms of battery life, you've got a 32.4 watt-hour battery. It provides 10 hours of battery life in terms of standard usage, but one interesting thing is that a non-tech found that if you turn on the cellular model and use it as a Wi-Fi hotspot, it can last for up to 24 hours. So in terms of hardware, the iPad Air gets pretty much everything right except for its speaker placement. When you have the device in landscape mode, all the sound is coming from the right-hand side, which is kind of a letdown because it doesn't sound as good, especially when you're watching video. Now, if you're holding it in portrait mode, it sounds perfectly fine, but when you put it on its side, that's when you run into an issue. And it's kind of disappointing because in terms of audio quality, these are very good. The sound is excellent on here. I'm just a little disappointed that they didn't have a stereo setup with one on each side. At first glance, the iPad Air is pretty much just a giant iPhone, and that's always been the case when it's come to iOS tablets, because Apple doesn't really make major changes in the home screen section, so you still got your standard docks, but there's little tiny things that change when you go along. For instance, the control center, you see that they have it split across, you have your controls Because it's a bigger device, obviously, you have more room for things. But when it comes to Notification Center, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just scaled differently. So everything that you've had before is going to look pretty much the same. But obviously, there are some cases where the changes and the similarity actually work to your benefit. For instance, multitasking. When I double tap to switch between apps, it looks exactly like it is on the iPhone, but because it's so much bigger, it is a joy to use. And you get a lot clearer picture of what you're going to, what app you're opening, what app you're closing, and it's the same thing as before. You drag up to dismiss an app. There we go. And then you tap on it to switch to a specific app. So aside from that, there are some other things that are pretty much identical. But again, because of the different form factor, it ends up working out to your advantage. For instance, Safari, again, the same concept, the same principles, but it looks a lot better when you have all this extra space. So technically, it is just a big iPhone, but it's a big iPhone that you're going to want to use a lot. And that brings me to my next point. It's just this is where the iPad really shines. The app choices. There are a lot of apps that are available on iOS and Android, but most of the time you're going to have them first on iOS and you're going to have more options. For instance, the Live Extra app from NBC, it is terrible on Android. Now, it's not the greatest thing on iOS either, but at least it works. It's not going to crash on you every few minutes. It's going to play decently. Aside from that, you have apps for playing, viewing live TV. The Watch ESPN app tends to be a little bit better on here than it is on Android, but that's more of a device issue rather than a software issue. So the problem isn't that you don't have apps available on Android, it's that developers tend to favor the iOS system. Good or bad, it's kind of a disappointment for me as someone who prefers Android, but at the same time, you do have more options. Aside from apps, you'll never want for content either because iTunes has pretty much anything that's available to you. They've got a large movie collection, music collection, TV shows, and the like. And it's pretty much the similar situation to when you browse for apps. They've got it organized according to different categories, popularity, and different subgenres. So books, TV shows, movies, pretty much anything that you want is going to be available to you. When it comes time to consume that content, you might run into a little bit of difficulty because the videos are a little disappointing because of the aspect ratio of the device itself. You've got a 4:3 ratio, but in modern times, most videos are HD quality. They're going to be 16:9. So you see a lot of video clips that are going to have the letterboxing, which is pretty much the two big black bars at the top and at the bottom. It's not a deal breaker by any sense, but it is annoying to have to see that adjustment because it's not going to be natural. And a lot of times it's going to be distracting depending on how attentive you are. Me personally, that kind of thing really draws my attention away from the content at times. So every now and then I found myself noticing that it wasn't 16:9 and being a little bit disappointed. Then you take a look at the cameras. On the front, you've got a 1.2 megapixel camera. It's capable of 720p FaceTime videos. And on the back, you have a 5 megapixel camera. Now, I'm of the camp that a tablet with a camera looks pretty stupid most of the time. But I know there's definitely some people that find use for it and want to use it. And actually, the camera on this isn't half bad. I was actually kind of surprised by what it was able to do. I have some some photo samples at the bottom. It's capable of shooting 1080p video, and the photos that it takes aren't crap, which is something that you typically don't hear about tablets. So in conclusion, I must admit, I was actually pretty surprised by this device because I'm not typically a fan of iPads because of some of the issues that I outlined in this review. But when it comes to the major things, like feeling comfortable holding the tablet, feeling comfortable using it, and being able to leave your house at a certain time and the device still lasting when you get home, the iPad Air definitely hits its marks. Now, if you're in the market for a tablet and Android doesn't exactly strike your fancy, if you get the iPad Air, you're going to get the big screen, you're going to get the light body, and you're going to get a lot of app choices. And you can do it more than you will on other devices. So the iPad Air starts at 16 gigabytes for $499, and it goes up incrementally all the way up to 128 gigabytes. And it can get pretty expensive. And that area is where that's one area I think that the iPad definitely suffers. You're dangerously into computer territory when you try to get the higher capacity. So if you want to focus on the 16 or 32 gigabytes and use this mainly for consuming the content rather than trying to create it, the iPad Air is definitely a very solid buy. Anyway, this is Andrew from mobileburn.com reviewing the iPad Air. Feel free to click the link in the description below for some more information. Until next time, thanks for watching.